I know that my actions and my value system and how I approach my work is absolutely shaped by what came before me. I am proud to say that I'm a son of factory workers, that I am a grandson of field workers. Our family hails from Jalisco, Mexico, a little village outside of Guadalajara. And my roots really don't begin when I was born. Some people believe that their life began when they were born. I don't. I have an incredible lineage of people who came well before me, not just in my own personal family, sort of ancestry and DNA, if you will, but from a community. Those powerful manifestations of identity, of culture, of language, of self, to be guided by faith and to be guided by a prospect of service, if you will. Those are all elements that are deeply rooted in my sense of self. The issue was, and I believe the issue for leaders is, can you unravel some of those things, unpackage some of those barriers that get in the way? And sadly, for too many, we don't. So part of, for me, the education process and the sort of self-discovery that occurred was from watching my own parents and grandparents who worked in the fields and in the factories, in this case of San Francisco, with a tremendous amount of dedication. Now that I'm older and have my own children, I really understand that a lot more. While today I have a suit and a tie and manage a lot of things and lead lots of things, I understand where my roots are. I am firmly planted on the ground. Kevin Ramirez, former superintendent president of Sierra College, told me 20 years ago when I was an executive dean, he said, do not confuse who you are with what you do. What you do may change over time. You might be an instructor, faculty, tenured, a dean, a vice president, president, a superintendent, a chancellor. Those are titles. Those may change and evolve over time based on people's choices, based on people's accolades. But who you are, and what undergirds your value system, the decisions you make, the choices that are in front of you, spend some time really understanding that. Because if you get caught up in a title and that title goes away, you can get easily dissuaded from pursuing other opportunities. Not confusing who you are with what you do. And I think the decoupling of that, one informs the other clearly. Mm-hmm. But I'm not caught up in that space and for many years now. So I focus in on now and nurture and better understand who I am. I spend as much time on that as in my sort of craft as an administrator. Who you are comes from, I think, that sage advice. And for me, it's hardworking immigrant parents. I still have the spirit of immigrants within my DNA, my soul. So when I work in this environment, I see, and when I work with students or parents or grandparents, I see my own family. And people say, you have an amazing ability to connect with people and this and that. Well, that's because I am the same community. It doesn't matter race or gender. I am that person. I am that community. I am that person who struggled as an English language learner, that person who grew up in a household that was loving, nurturing, and whatnot, but we didn't have lots of material things, and frankly, we didn't miss them. Sharing a message with the young leaders about the inherent strengths that they do have that might be buried, hidden, untapped, or perhaps even undiscovered. You know, what I would say to the young leaders is to be reflective. One of the most important professions or conditions or strategies, maybe just use that word. One of the most important strategies for young leaders is to be a reflective practitioner. There's a lot of emphasis on the what, resources that one would use to do something, to lead something, to support something. But really focus in on the why it matters. And I think if we have equal distribution of not just how you're going to do something, but why it's important, And if it is successful, what does that look like? So the first thing to that, in terms of being reflective, the first thing is to don't believe the negative narratives that have been placed upon us throughout our lives, throughout our histories. Don't rely on an old history book to tell your history. Understand your personal family history, go back, look at it. For me, understanding what my own personal family's journey was like to get to the place that we are today is really, in some ways, a classic immigrant tale. And, some of that courage, resilience, and poise under pressure, under deplorable conditions, with demeaning wages, with horrific working conditions, my family endured. And other immigrant families endured. And so that gives me a tremendous amount of, first of all, purposeful anger, coraje, as I call it, but it also gives me tremendous amount of focus and dedication. For me, I've never lost or compromised or watered down my Mexicanness as a person. And that is what today I believe adds value to the work that I'm doing. If indeed of our almost 250,000 students that we serve, 60% are Latinx origin, if you will, that is my community. So those things that people had told us in the past were negatives, those stereotypes and how box us into a particular set of characteristics, I claim those as falsehoods. I denounce those. I choose not to believe those. What I choose to believe is an asset-mindedness, that what we bring to the table, irrespective of the culture that we come from, that is strength. I don't want to sound too sort of disingenuous when I say this, but if you really take time to think about your ancestry and what fuels you and whatnot, there's a fearlessness that develops, a moral conscience, a clarity, but also I will do the right thing. Because at the end of the day, as they say, have I been a good person? Have I carried out my duties and responsibilities faithfully? Have I been dutiful? Have I been honest? Have I done my work with integrity? Those are things that I need to always have the yes columns on. Well, the responsibilities we have as educators is to build a better future for our students. So if we go with that mindset, that sense of not just hopefulness, but that sense of zeal, that sense of purposefulness, that sense of clarity, we can do great things. In reflecting on combating false narratives, thinking way, way back about that, growing up in San Francisco, and I believe that growing up in the Mission District in particular of San Francisco, for me, as I reflect on it now, was an incredible learning laboratory. So as a kid who continues to be, and to this day, very observant of things around me, because growing up in the Mission, you had to be observant. You had to be observant of everything. For safety reasons, you just had to be observant and awake. I really absorbed and embraced the colors and the music and the narrative that was counter to what was in our textbooks, the contributions of Asian Americans, African Americans, Chicanos, Latinos, Native Americans, was sparse at best. What fueled from my own parents was the sort of moral turpitude, the moral character piece, the justice piece that sort of fueled that. And so when I got to 8th grade, there was another outreach program, like a high potential program for Black and brown youth. And I was selected to go on scholarship to a school across the city, a boys' school, where my tuition 50% was covered from a generous donor, an unknown philanthropist, put a pool of monies together to reach out for young boys like me who had high potential. So a good number of us from our class went to Archbishop Riordan High School. All boys, very diverse, and boys from the hood, quote unquote, like me, with kids from the other side of town. It was like an education abroad experience in some ways, because I was now classmates with people who were very different than me. And that's where I first kind of felt the sort of power of privilege and wealth. I'd never really felt that before. Got us in the auditorium and they said, we're going to build your moral character for service. We build leaders and we build men of character. And I was a 14, 15-year-old boy. And I believed it. I just believed it because I felt incredibly privileged that I was on scholarship, was a very good student. I did. I worked hard because my job was to be a student at home. So that awakening, I think, began with the political consciousness, moral character, really became sort of fomented in those days. I never viewed myself as a leader, if you will. I don't know. I've never been caught up in titles. I am more interested in the work. And then in doing the work, labels are placed on you. And maybe some of this, and I need to be honest about this, was that I worked hard because I didn't want to be labeled in the ways that the false narrative had interpreted me, and people like me, and people who are immigrants, as lazy, untrustworthy, if you will, that we were shifty, that we could not be trusted, that we could not be relied upon. All these complete falsehoods, because that was the way people who are unknown or unregarded or disregarded are described. Look at any immigrant community. Those are the labels that whomever decides to control the narrative or wants to control the narrative puts on those. That manifestation, first of all, I think is fueled by a level of confidence. First of all, for me, it's about language and proximity. In other words, I am comfortable with code switching. And what I mean by that is, and I think it's an incredibly underrated skill, in the environment that I've described earlier, growing up, learning, observing, being a part of, not understanding, all that helps to shape the sort of your own personal narrative. One of the best tools that I learned early on is that most of communication is nonverbal. So focusing on your affect. People infer excellence, competence, mostly on your affect. Do you carry yourself in a way that is prideful? Do you shrug your shoulders when things are bad? The leadership part is not just about understanding the political climate, landscape that is created through narratives, sometimes false narratives. But there's also in leadership a moral component that allows you to persist, to make tough decisions, to take the risk. The risk of what? What's the worst that can happen? You get fired? If you stand on principle and get fired, that's a good thing, because we cannot compromise the moral character in your principle, because that's what has to hold. And if you do and succeed, then you start building a profile, a characteristic that you will stand on principle, that you will not be compromised and jeopardize or mortgage the future of the students that you're responsible for. I've had multiple circumstances where that's been tested over 33 years now. And I'm clear on where I stand and where I sit and what I do. That's clear. I think one of the best compliments that I've heard people say about me is that he's even keeled. When I'm in board meetings and things get really kind of, let's just say, exciting, there has to be an even-handedness there, irrespective of what I'm thinking. But what I show is an evenness. So the nonverbal cues, focusing on your affect, having a command of ideas, and understanding your audience so that you could use language that is familiar, comfortable, clear to that particular audience, whether it's one-on-one or a group. I think is absolutely essential. You can't just tell people that you believe in them and their future when you're talking to audiences or to a faculty member. They have to feel that you're authentic, that you are purposeful, that you are genuine. Third and most important thing, to invest in others, to invest in people around you, to trust them, to hold them, support them, but hold them accountable in the same way that you indeed are accountable. One of the most important decisions we make as leaders is who you hire. And I have kept the premise that you hire for character and you train for skills. And that is an absolute, for me, mantra, because the character portion of what we were describing, I think, is key. And I think this is from the Drucker School, that you lead people and you manage things. Because if you try to manage people, bad things happen. So those are just some simple principles of how I manifest leadership, try to hold true to my truths. And believe me, I have bad days and I do get angry. But it's important that I have a sense of predictability and expectation, that you're unabashedly representing a student body that has, in some cases, very little representation, that you're going to stand with communities who are invisible in the higher education landscape. And you focus on the why. If we do our work well, we begin to eradicate poverty. If we do our work well, we begin to eradicate illiteracy. If we do our work well, we begin to build a beautiful path to the middle class. So we should put in our full effort to do that. And that's what I believe.